I come from actually a company called BIG. We're located in Copenhagen and New York. We design buildings, but we also do haircuts. But among other things, we're building these two babies in Miami. We just had a nice session with D. Simone, 2 towers on sloping columns, and also this project in the Bahamas with gravity-defying balconies with swimming pools up against the glass. But what I'd like to talk about today is some of the ideas that have shaped our work. We come from Copenhagen, where we've been sort of founded 10 years ago. And one of the things we've been looking very much at is how you can make the programmatic diversity of a building actually provide shape. We did a building called the 8 House in Copenhagen. It's at city limits where other life forms take over the city. Thank you, sir. We basically mixed traditional sort of offices, and we exploited the fact that commercial floor plates are deeper than residential floor plates. So we created a 3-dimensional community that actually allows social life, street life, townhouses with gardens to actually invade the 3-dimensional space of the city block. So instead of having social life sort of restricted to occurring at the street level, here it's invading the 3-dimensional space of the city. All the amenities are located in a vertical atrium at the heart of the building. And you actually have like almost like sort of a suburban life quality, like parks in the courtyards, sort of couples barbecuing on their front lawns, like these 2 little girls. They live on the 9th and the 10th floor, but they can actually just stroll down this like man-made mountain town, like this little path, and play with each other. So it's completely expanding the sort of 3-dimensional notion of what is the city. And basically this building caught the eye of Manhattan developer Durst, who invited us to take a look at a site on the west side of Hudson. And we thought, this site, it's beautifully overlooking the river. It has west-facing and south-facing sun, but it's also next to a power plant, a sanitation garage, and the West Side Highway. So we thought, like, what they really need is an oasis in the middle of the city. And this is the city block where my dad grew up in Copenhagen, a typical Copenhagen courtyard, which essentially is at the architectural scale what Central Park is at the urban scale, an oasis in the middle of the city. And we thought, what happens when you marry or crossbreed the skyscraper, the American skyscraper, with the European courtyard, or essentially what could a court scraper look like? So we placed the courtyard on the waterfront. In the northeast, we raised it to 40 floors, but still keeping the southwest corner low so we can get sunlight and views over the water. The result is a striking new silhouette. As you move close, it describes a saddle shape, almost like a swoosh. From the east, it looks like a spire. When you enter into the courtyard actually has exactly the same proportions as Central Park, only it's 13,000 times smaller. All of the apartments have views over the water. It's the height of a handrail in one corner. It's the height of a high-rise in the other. Balconies sunken into the roof. And basically, the logic is we're using the straight lines on the edges. The geometry is a hyperbolic paraboloid, or a saddle shape. Straight lines for the BMUs to run, gravity lines for the BMUs to access every single part of the sloping surface. The horizontal lines that are actually the water lines where we drain the roof. And that finally leaves space for the terraces to pop out. And basically this sort of a concert of all of the practicalities and utilities of a high-rise basically determine the tectonics of the architecture. This is the model, this is the building. It's been taking place over the last 5 years, and it's actually becoming like this, you have like the framed view. This is going to be like a green oasis overlooking the Hudson River. And this is what it looked like 2 weeks ago. essentially a rather striking new presence on the skyline of Manhattan. This is a photo taken from a passenger airplane, but the sort of beacon of architecture in a haze of the city of Manhattan. So speaking of the skyline of Manhattan, of course, like the skyline has been or is the sort of place of architectural icons, and of course one of the tragic events to the skyline of Manhattan and the city of Manhattan and the entire country was, of course, the collapse of the Twin Towers that left this gaping wound in the middle of the city. It's now been replaced by this like sanctuary, the two beautiful fountains in the footprints of the former towers. And right here, adjacent to One World Trade Center, we were asked 6 months ago to imagine the last tower, the two World Trade Center that's finally going to complete Danny Libeskind's master plan of this sort of spiral of ascending towers towards the Freedom Tower or One World Trade Center. It's going to be located right at the sort of gateway between the city blocks of Tribeca with the cobblestone streets and the urban blocks and the skyscrapers of downtown. So we thought, like, could we imagine an architecture that would somehow marry the straight-laced sort of serenity of the sort of downtown skyscrapers with the sort of diversity and variation of the Tribeca blocks. Essentially, could we imagine a building that could be equally at home in both neighborhoods? The anchor tenants are going to be News Corp and Fox. So essentially, rather than the typical financial company, it's a company that combines large floor plates for studios, for television and cinema, medium floor plates with big open collaborative floor plates for newsrooms, and finally more classic floor plates where you have leasing depths surrounding a central core. So basically, it's not just one building, one floor plate, it's a lot of different buildings, each tailored to their individual needs, that we then combine to form a tower that is, on one hand, towards the memorial, organized along the wedge of light. It becomes like a vertical silhouette. You have the urban podium. The lowest floors are the largest and longest. And then as the floor plates get shorter, they can also get wider. So we end up getting a silhouette that actually expands in one direction, so it leans with the leaning silhouette of One World Trade Center. It creates a series of cascading gardens where the different blocks rest on top of each other. So from the memorial, it actually looks like one of its neighbors, like a very sort of formal, understated modern tower. The sort of expansion of the east facade sort of leans, or the west facade leans along with the inclination of One World Trade Center. But when you see it from the other side, from Tribeca, you really see this sort of bundle of buildings. It becomes a much more sort of abstract and avant-garde, lively building with the gardens that come down to the scale of the churchyard. And where each of these buildings rest on top of each other, they create giant roof gardens where the life of the tenants can actually expand to the outside. Even if you're 1,100 feet up in the air, you have access to lush gardens. We create openings that connect between the different floor plates. Some places we dump courtyards into the terraces, so you have like these sort of sanctuaries sort of 800 feet up in the air. In some places we sort of dip the terraces down to sort of give access to the spaces behind. So rather than the sort of hermetic silhouette of the traditional skyscraper, you get this like very lively building. Of course, because it's a TV production, you get these like amazing backdrops with the city of New York in the background, sort of placing the building. We're still hoping to make this amazing screening room on the top floor where when the movie is over, the image might be even more amazing. One of the challenges of this tower is that because the rest of the World Trade Center site has already moved ahead, the foundations and the stairs and the columns were already in place. So we've had to basically fit our ideal design, that is designed from the second floor and up, to match the existing footprints. And as a result, the lobby, you'll see the stair cores changing direction, so it almost gets this like abstract sculpture that is literally shaped by the transition of the forces from the top to the ground. The north elevation is stepping towards the sky. The west elevation is expanding towards the sky. And basically, when you look at the building from the west, you'll see the overhangs as the building get wider. Are actually spaces where the content that is being produced inside the building is coming out of the ground, and you'll follow the information like towards the sky, and gradually as it sort of turns the corner, you'll see the information sort of climbing towards the sky from where it's produced on the ground to where it's like emitted at the top. So even the architecture is broadcasting what's happening inside to the surrounding city. And basically, we are sort of starting the reinforcement of the foundations already next spring, and it should be done at the end of 2020, sort of finally completing not just the neighborhood, but also the skyline of Lower Manhattan. So basically, having sort of arrived here, we suddenly started dealing with high-rises in a completely new way. One of the projects we're doing in Shenzhen is the headquarters for the main energy company in Shenzhen. And it's essentially creating a 1 million square foot office building in a humid subtropical climate. One of the dilemmas is you want to sort of maximize the views, but you want to minimize the thermal exposure and the glare. So we've designed the facade like a sort of a pleated dress. So it blocks all of the direct sun coming from the south. So when you look to the south, it's like these bamboo veneer walls washed in daylight. But when you turn and look towards the north, it's an all-glass facade. Within this logic, we can sort of create larger openings to enter. We can create executive meeting rooms looking towards the city hall. But essentially, this sort of very simple idea, we worked with Arab engineers. They calculated that without any sort of technology or moving parts, we can actually save 33% of the energy spent on air conditioning simply because of the geometry of the facade. It also has an impact on the architecture, the experience of the building, the sort of the slender slabs, both in the lobbies and on the floors. But essentially, the idea is that what makes this building look different is also what makes it perform differently. The way it responds to the environment is what makes its architecture unique. It's currently under construction and should be completed within a year and a half. Another example of how a skyscraper can respond to its surroundings is we're doing a tower in Vancouver, the Vancouver House. It's located where Granville Bridge touches downtown. There's a series of setback requirements from the streets, setbacks from the bridges. Then there's like almost like a deal breaker. There's a 100-foot setback because the city wants to ensure that nobody looks straight into the traffic of the bridge. Then there's a park where we're not supposed to cast any shadows. And finally, we're left with only 6,000 square feet of footprint, almost too small to develop. So we got this idea, if we need to make 100 feet minimum distance, once we get 100 feet up in the air, we can come back out, we can reclaim the lost area. So as you drive over Granville Bridge, it's almost as if someone is pulling a curtain aside, sort of welcome to Vancouver. Almost like a genie coming out of the bottle and expanding to 12,000 square feet on the skyline. It's almost like the logic of the Flatiron. The Flatiron was a child of this moment in Manhattan real estate history where the real estate prices, steel structure, and elevators suddenly made a small triangle into what is now the defining landmark of a whole neighborhood, except we're taking this idea like one step further. And basically underneath, we're trying to transform, you have like retail and workspaces underneath. We're trying to transform the underside of the Granville Bridge into what we call the 16th Chapel of Street Art, an upside-down outdoor art exhibition. So basically, like you can see like how the infrastructure of the city around it has actually radically shaped this tower. It's currently under construction and it's going to open in 24 months. But like this idea of like infrastructure influencing a building, we've looked at like almost at the smallest scale possible. We were asked to do a small art museum in a sculpture park in Norway. The sculpture park is on two sides of a river. And we thought, why don't we turn the museum into a bridge? It connects both of the sides, so you move around through the paths of the sculpture park, you move through the museum, the skylight of the sculpture galleries turn 90 degrees and overlook the river as you pass over the bridge, and then you continue through the sculpture park. So if you like it, this is almost like a hybrid between a building, a bridge, and a sculpture. You can almost see it as the biggest sculpture in the sculpture park. Depending on where you notice it from, you might not even know it's a building. You think it's just one of the biggest sculptures in the park. This idea that infrastructure and architecture can really sort of merge into hybrids. You see, like, the public element is a very big part of our work and our priorities. But in one case, we actually really almost surrendered the authorship to the public. You might remember 3 years ago, Manhattan and New York got hit by Sandy, shutting off all of Lower Manhattan. According to a cartoonist, it gave rise to a new neighborhood in New York, Sao Paulo, south of Power. And the science is quite simple, that with the expanding temperatures, the hurricane belt of the Atlantic Ocean expanding to the north, and suddenly the states that didn't used to get hit by hurricanes are getting hit more frequently and more forcefully. And because of the funnel shape of the New York Bight, New York is extra prone, 50% of the city is at risk. And we were asked by the City of New York and the Housing and Urban Development Department of the United States to look at how could we make the 12 miles of contiguous waterfront protection in a way that doesn't become a flood wall that segregates the life of the city from the water around it. And we thought, like, what if we could learn from the High Line? The High Line is a piece of decommissioned infrastructure that has now been granted a new layer of social and environmental programs. And we thought, like, what if we don't have to wait for the infrastructure, the rail yards, to get decommissioned? What if we can actually design the resiliency infrastructure of Manhattan in such a way that it comes with intended positive social side effects? So we thought of this project, we nicknamed it the Dry Line to the High Line, but essentially we thought of it as, you know, like New York's city development has been characterized by these two giants. On one hand, Robert Moses, the power broker, a public servant with like almost totalitarian power, who designed or like created most of the highways, the public housing projects, often with devastating impact on the local community. When he tried to run a highway through the Greenwich Village, he encountered resistance from Jane Jacobs, who rallied the local neighborhood and in a sort of David Goliath moment, defeated the project and saved the village. We thought, what if the Dry Line, or the Big U as we've also called it, could be conceived as the love child of Bob Moses and Jane Jacobs? Because to resist an incoming flood, you need 12 miles of holistic, coordinated waterfront protection. But to make it socially successful, it needs to happen in close dialogue with the local community. So I'd like to show you a film that we've made. We reached out to all of the representatives of the communities along the Dry Line. Together with them, we have actually tailored the necessary waterfront protection in such a way that it not only protects from an incoming storm surge, it also enhances their enjoyment of the waterfront. So this is a video where you can see the people from the community that we worked with, their experience of Sandy, their like wishes for the future, and what it might look like.
That was actually why Sandy was so bad, is because of the phase of the moon. It was already a very large high tide, as well as the storm surge coming in with the wind and the tide lining up perfectly to give us 14-foot tides instead of 8-foot.
The most shocking part of Hurricane Sandy was the fact that it exceeded expectations.
I think the sheer magnitude of it caught a lot of people off guard.
When Hurricane Sandy came, we were not prepared at all. I mean, not even the slightest.
Yeah, it was like an alien invasion of water. and not the good kind of water.
So yeah, I mean, it came right in front where there was literally boats on 14th Street floating in front of our window.
We had a sub-basement level office a block from here, and it was totally covered in water for 2 days. So we lost everything. Everything.
We're really concerned about another storm and the flooding that's possible, and we think that the next time it's going to come even further inland.
I'd like to see some type of flood protection in this area. That's going to happen. We're vulnerable, obviously, being this close to the water.
Something that just brings like more different walks of life, you know, another escape from just the busyness and the hustle and bustle.
There's this great space that could really become community space, cultural space, and active uses.
Everyone enjoys space. And in New York and other congested cities, it's hard to come by.
Anything that makes the cities greener is just such a wonderful thing for not only the environment, but the people that live in the city too, to be able to be around that space.
The plans, the berming, the sense of how it can become into the natural landscape itself, how we want to program that is really the next challenge. We are the link, we're the tip in the sense of the big U. It's important that the entire waterfront of Lower Manhattan build in the plans that have been put forward, because we can not only fortify this great city of New York, but be a model for cities all over the world.
So that brings me to it, and we're actually together with the City of New York working on the realization of the first part of this project on the East River to break ground in 2017. That brings me to sort of like this is like what we see as this element, which is also the title of the talk, like social infrastructure. And just to give you like one tangible example of this to finish. We're doing a project in my old hometown, Copenhagen, on the waterfront, which might be the landmark of the city in the future, but it's not a cultural palace or a royal palace. It's a power plant that turns domestic waste into electricity and district heating. Basically, together with the citizens of Copenhagen, it forms an ecosystem. And when you look at household trash as a resource, a ton of trash equals 1 2/3 of an oil barrel in value. But they operate on a sort of economy of scale, so they're like very big buildings. This is going to be the biggest and tallest building in Copenhagen. It's going to be right next to Copenhagen Marina and right where the locals go water skiing. So we thought, how can we make this sort of nice for the neighborhood? Danes love to ski. We're a cold climate. We have snow, but we have absolutely no mountains. Apparently, we have mountains of trash. So we thought that we have to go 6 hours by car to Isabel in the south of Sweden, but because of the sheer magnitude of this power plant, we can actually do 2/3 of Isabel. We have a 300-foot drop, so we know how big the machines are going to be, so we just designed the envelope in such a way that the entire roof becomes a gigantic man-made ski slope, complete with pine trees and hiking paths. Insanely, we won the competition based on this idea. Suddenly we need to figure it out. Just to give you a sense of scale, it's twice the length of an Olympic halfpipe. You might have noticed that in Sochi, Denmark won 0 medals. We hope to redeem that because now we can actually practice at home. It's not just for skiers, it's also a hiking path for like people that go on picnics. You can go up and enjoy the view of the otherwise horizontal city. We have the tallest climbing wall in the world, 300 feet of danger. And basically just to sort of, it's currently under construction, and I'm telling you, this is only like halfway up the ski slope. It is going to be a real ski slope. And you can basically this sort of diagram that I showed in the beginning of like a city as an ecosystem is very close to becoming true here. Not only do we harvest local resources, daylight, air flows, water, but also together with the city of Copenhagen becomes a metabolism turning waste into energy. And maybe just to sort of finish it off, the reason that we could win this project with this idea is because this is a very new kind of power plant. It's the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. The smoke that comes out of the chimney is completely non-toxic. It contains a little bit of steam and a little bit of CO2. So we thought and basically by putting a ski slope on the roof, normally you would want to be as far away from a power plant as possible. But here you actually have clean mountain air on the roof, and it becomes visible because you're skiing on it. To take it to the final step, we designed the chimney in such a way that it accumulates steam, and at regular intervals it puffs gigantic steam rings. Something that used to be a symbol of a problem, pollution, is now something playful. And the idea is that each steam ring represents whenever we have saved the emission of 1 ton of CO2 by having this clean technology. So it's like turning the sky into a celebration. And maybe just like now that we're in a room with at least a handful of engineers, as I can count, when you win a competition with something like that and you look up in the yellow pages, there are no giant steam ring emitting manufacturers in the country. So together with the Copenhagen Technical University, an engineer with a specialty in vortexes, we have tried to sort of see if we could develop a giant steam ring emitting machine. We've done a few tests, but last summer we had a nice one.
Der er kraftedeme ikke noget at diskutere. Nu tror jeg sgu på det. Det er fandme godt. Ej, hvor er det vigtigt. Hvor er det vigtigt.
And what I like about the steam ring is that I think it's kind of a beautiful symbol. Is that at the core of it, architecture and engineering is in a way the art and science of turning fiction into fact. That we take something that is a pure figment of our imagination, and then through hard work and like years of like permits and tests, etc., it becomes concrete reality. And I like this idea that in 2 years, if you come to Europe, you might come back and say, you know, it's amazing in Venice, they have paved the streets with water and they sail in gondolas. And in Copenhagen, they ski on their power plants that turn trash into electricity and heating and that puff giant smoke rings. And it'll just be the hard reality of Denmark in 2 years. So I think every time we're being invited to intervene in a situation or build a skyscraper, not only do we have the possibility, but we actually have a responsibility to make our world and the cities we live in a little bit more like our dreams.